What's up, everybody? I hope that George enjoys his theme song. So you want to get right to the core. So you want to know what it's all for. So you want to come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George. He knows what he's fighting for. It's Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Want to know what we're fighting for?
Well, hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. Thank you, Ron Placone, for that outstanding introduction. I mean, I love that theme song. I mean, he's got his Joe Strummer Clash t-shirt on. He's kind of doing that in the, the spirit of Clash. I really like that. And by the way, if you're watching this out on the northeastern part of the United States in particular, and we do have viewers in New York State, particularly up in that part. Ron Placone's out on tour. He's going to be in your neck of the woods, so check him out. But today we're going to be talking about politics as usual, but we're going to be talking poison pipelines of the carbon variety and the boondoggle associated with that. And joining us on the podcast by George LiveLine today is Emma Schmidt. Now, Emma's an organizer for Food and Water Watch. You've seen her on the show before, and she's one of those young activists that Podcast by George just loves because she didn't just talk the talk. She's out walking the walk, folks, and you can see that in her little graphic there. She's doing the heavy lifting, trying to save us all, and is here today to talk about one of the most crushing issues of our times, industrial agriculture and poison carbon capture pipelines. It's big industry, folks. It's big money with big political clout, and it is killing us all. And she's not going to have any of it. If it's up to Emma, if she can get it done, folks, she's going to put a stop to all of that crap. And that's what she's here today to talk to us about on the live line. Hi, Emma.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Well, thanks for coming on in here. And you had a victory of sorts, at least, a pause button anyway, it looks like, in the Iowa State House. I wanted to talk about that. But we've even got some more late breaking type news, and I'm going to talk about that first of all, and it is linked, and it has to do with this Bruce Rastetter guy. Let me bring this up on screen now. This is out of this morning's Des Moines Register. Rastetter bets big again on biofuels. The ag giant is behind a $4.5 billion carbon capture pipeline. I saw that headline, Emma, and I thought, well, he's betting on biofuels. I thought he was betting on a carbon capture pipeline. Well, here's the gist of it. Bruce Rastetter, an Iowa agricultural heavyweight. Okay, we haven't gotten more than a couple of sentences in this, Emma, and he's already a giant. He's a heavyweight. The force behind a $4.5 billion carbon capture pipeline. He says the massive project could spark a renaissance for the renewable fuel industry. Oh, well, that sounds good. Quote, we have an opportunity to do a world-class project. Oh, a world-class project that gives biofuels a future that's desperately needed in a world demanding more sustainability. Rastetter recently told investors in an event at a North Carolina ethanol plant. Well, I read that, Emma, and I thought, well, this sounds like a guy, with the Buggy Whip Association, or this sounds like a guy with the Carbon Capture Pipeline Association tied to asbestos makers or something. We need more sustainability for asbestos. I don't know. I had to laugh, but this is really serious business. It's not funny.
It is fascinating how he thinks he's going to be building a world-class pipeline when he's never built a pipeline before in his life. It's I mean, like we've talked about, it is nothing more than a boondoggle, right?
Yes. Let's continue on with the article here. Because we got a lot of stuff to look at today, folks. I want to be able to, let's see if I can get this to come up on screen now. I got to click this button. Okay. So now we're back to this article. He was up at that North Dakota ethanol plant. Rastetter is betting that renewable fuels can be part of the climate change solution. at a time when electric vehicles are eclipsing gas and ethanol burning engines as the future of transportation. You see why I said it was like the Buggy Whip Association? The CEO of Summit Agricultural Group near Alden has a record of tackling ambitious challenges, building a farming empire in Iowa and Brazil. And again, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. I read the guys, okay. At 65, Rastetter proposes constructing a 2,000-mile pipeline across Iowa and 4 other Midwestern states that he says will make it possible to slash carbon emissions from nearby plants. Let me bring this back up on screen again. Keeping competitive the renewable fuel industry that consumes half of Iowa's annual corn crop. And when I see that, Emma, I'm always surprised. A lot of people aren't aware of that. I wasn't really until I got a little closer to this issue. Half of the corn that we produce in this state is used by ethanol production. That's really amazing.
It is really interesting, especially when we hear, particularly by groups like the Iowa Farm Bureau, that Iowa's farmers are feeding the world. Well,
Yes.
you can't have it both way, folks. You're either giving half of your land, half of your crop to feed cars for ethanol that we know is a dirty energy source, or you're feeding the world. Like, pick one side or the other, but you can't have it
Yeah.
both ways.
And I've got a quote coming up, I think in the same article that deals exactly with this. Rastetter's plan also has gained a diverse coalition of critics, from property owners concerned about potential damage to their land to environmentalists, those damned environmentalists. Now, I got to take issue again. I fancied myself a wordsmith at one time, Emma. I look at this and I think, okay, critics. And they talk about property owners. That's legit. But they want to quantify the other opposition is environmentalists, kind of like tree huggers, like I mentioned, to kind of put it into the category of extremists. But they're, from what I have seen, a preponderance of impartial third-party observers, scientists, people that understand this stuff, that would be opposed to these carbon capture pipelines. It's not just tree huggers.
Absolutely. I mean, this is made for such strange bedfellows. I mean, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's libertarians, and no parties. It is people that would never once think about working side by side with tree huggers, right? It's brought together folks that are against the destruction of our property rights at the same time as it's brought folks that are concerned about our climate and the potential impacts to the land that these pipelines will cause. Like, it's very interesting how many people are against this. In fact, we have polling that should be released tomorrow that will show just exactly how many Iowans are adamantly opposed to these pipelines, and I can tell you that number is huge. Like, I can't tell you the exact number till tomorrow, but it is probably the biggest support I've ever seen for an issue ever.
That's great. That means that your work is taking hold and what you're doing is taking effect, because my sense of this is looking at the science again and the climate scientists that have looked into this thing. There's one of the worst parts of this is it takes our eye off the ball. It takes our money from needed resources. I mean, it won't work. It is harmful. It is not a solution. It is a boondoggle for a very few select group of individuals in the state of Iowa, and it doesn't benefit the rest of us at all. When we need some benefit, folks, we need some solutions. The environmentalists say it's the wrong approach to problems that demands wind and solar-based solutions. They staged a rally at the Iowa Capitol Rotunda Tuesday, pushing the legislature to take strong measures against Summit's potential use of eminent domain to amass the needed land. Okay, I highlighted that section right there, Emma, because pushing the legislature to take strong measures against Summit's potential use of eminent domain, don't they just want a rejection of the authorization to do this, or do they want a bill to stop it? Or that kind of sounds like they're just encouraging lawmakers to do something nebulous in the future, maybe that will prevent this.
Right. And so that's one of the issues we faced. We did have a bill earlier this session that would have effectively stopped the use of eminent domain for these pipelines and stopped these pipelines in the process because the approval for these pipelines is so low. I mean, at the last public figures we had, less than 2% of landowners had signed easements for their lands with Summit. But unfortunately, I'm sorry, my cat is going haywire.
that's that's all right. I like cats. It wants some attention, Emma. You're not paying attention to it. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that bill died. It was shot down by the governor because, as I'm sure we'll talk to, there are a lot of political connections and political issues at play with these pipelines, and a lot of big money at play too. But so we did see then, right before our rally the week before, Representative Bobby Kaufman, along with Representative Mike Sexton, introduced an amendment to an appropriations bill that would have basically put a moratorium on the use of eminent domain until February 1st. It's not a great solution because it really does just kick the can down the road. It's better than nothing, and it reopened the door that we thought had been closed on us to see any sort of legislative action this session. But unfortunately, we really didn't expect the eminent domain hearings to be over before February 1st of next year anyways. And so this just kind of continues to let Summit and other pipeline companies like Navigator and ADM, Wolf, to continue harassing landowners and pressuring them to sign easements. And what we really need is a complete stop on eminent domain for these carbon pipelines, because we know they aren't for the public good. They aren't for the public interest. They exist to make a couple of wealthy men even wealthier. And that's what we want to see in legislation, but the political will isn't there from our legislators at this point. There's a lot of different reasons why, from the fact that Bruce Rastetter, the CEO of Summit Carbon Solutions, being the top Republican donor here in Iowa. I mean, he's donated over $1.5 million. He's donated over $50,000 to Kim Reynolds just in the past year, right?
Yeah.
So the Republicans don't want to do anything. They don't want to tick off the guy that's kind of leading the way there. But at the same time, Democrats are spooked because they don't want to come off as anti-farmer. Because if you oppose this pipeline, then you're opposing the longevity of the ethanol industry.
It's a third rail politically. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I've talked about that on the podcast just here in the past week. The two big third rails here. I mean, you can't do anything that is even somewhat negative when it comes to big ag in this state. And of course, the other thing would be big insurance. And that is the triangulation here on the show. We talk about war, climate, and healthcare all the time. Climate and healthcare being related intrinsically, obviously. Well, I want to get to this article to continue because it's just what you're talking about, Emma. Who is the man behind the hotly contested pipeline, which has sparked both excitement and trepidation? Okay, maybe I'm too close to this, Emma, but I've seen a lot of trepidation, a lot of opposition. I see your rallies. I hear you talk about those statistics and the huge percentage of people that are opposed to this. I don't see a lot of excitement. Did you see? Are there a lot of people jumping up and down about a carbon capture pipeline? Do you see excitement anywhere? Where does that word come from? That just jumped out at me.
Excitement comes from two groups: is the board members of ethanol facilities and the unions. Unfortunately, typically we are side by side in lockstep with the unions and in labor in general, but they do typically tend to support pipelines, and that's where they're at right now. In fact, at our event last week, the unions kind of counter protested us, and it was really.
I saw that. Yeah, I've got a slide on that too. We're going to get to that coming up. But let's continue on this now. And you spoke of this. One of Iowa's largest political donors, contributing $2.2 million to candidates over 24 years, according to Open Secrets, a nonprofit research group that tracks money in U.S. elections. Now, most of his donations, Rastetter's, have gone to Republicans, including former Governor Terry Branstad. Wait for it. He's now a Summit senior advisor. Branstad is. I mean, what a tangled web we weave. He's an Iowa farm kid who's made and lost fortunes raising hogs, producing ethanol, and reviving Iowa's largest beef processing plant. Summit Agricultural Group now manages $2 billion in assets. That's a lot of assets, folks. Now, I highlighted this next sentence because this struck me as kind of odd, Emma. I don't know if you've got any insight on this at all. If this is correct, Now, Summit Agricultural Group manages 14,000 corn and soybean acres. And it sounds like a big number, but that's not really a very big number. Is that because they're not so much into, tilling soybeans and corn as they are in hogs and cattle and other things? 14,000 acres sounds like a lot, but it's really not. That kind of surprised me. I would have expected that number to be, well, I don't know, maybe 10 times that big. But anyway, 14,000 corn and soybean acres.
One thing I will note is that Summit, we do know, has been buying up land in Iowa for years now, and they typically do it behind a series of LLCs, so you don't really know who is buying it. So if this is just what's publicly that we can figure out.
Who owns what? Yeah, exactly. So this is Summit proper anyway. Large cattle and hog operations and massive Brazilian ethanol and farming businesses. Some investors lost out when he sold off his hog business amid mounting losses and took his ethanol company into bankruptcy. But since then, his personal fortune has soared. Okay, so we've got time here with Emma today, and I want to encourage everybody to pose their questions and make comments on this controversial issue. But when I think of this Bruce Rastetter guy and how he's able to make a fortune and rise and fall and have bankruptcies and move along, it's because the system protects and uplifts these people. Emma, I tell people, young people your age, if it were me to do all over again, I'd be doing something. It really doesn't matter how nutty it is. You're protected. You'll get loans and grants to get it started. You can pull in political favors if you have any. You'll get subsidies and tax breaks as you go along with it to keep it going. And then if it all collapses because it was a dumb idea to start with, you're going to get bankruptcy protection and you're going to come out smelling like a rose like Rastetter does. And you keep coming up with these projects. Now, I'm going to play this clip and then just to kind of underline what I'm talking about a little bit. Because even this Register article, they want you to believe that this guy is a captain. He's a giant. You heard that terminology earlier. Okay. Well, here's what a guy named Barack Obama had to say about exactly that.
If you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. You didn't get there on your own. I'm always struck by people who think, well, it must be because I was just so smart. There are a lot of smart people out there. It must be because I worked harder than everybody else. Let me tell you something. There are a whole bunch of hard-working people out there. If you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. There was a great teacher somewhere in your life. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that we had that allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. The internet didn't get invented on its own.
Okay, so I mean, he got a lot of flack for that comment, but maybe not for the right reasons. Obama did say some good things, and that was another criticism of Obama. He said a lot of great things. He wasn't able to get as many great things accomplished as he would like, obviously, Emma, but that's the whole point. Now, he was talking about maybe you had the help of a teacher, and I'm like, maybe you had the help of a politician. Maybe you had the help of a Terry Branstad or a Kim Reynolds or somebody like that is making these things possible. Friends in the Iowa legislature that are trying to push this thing over, trying to run roughshod on groups like Food and Water Watch and people like Emma Schmidt.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that we've seen come out of this, Bruce has a scandal every couple of years, right? And one of the most just appalling ones was when he basically bought his way onto the Iowa Board of Regents, thanks to all of his donations with Terry Branstad, who then appointed him, right? Yeah. And then he used his connections there to convince Iowa State to invest in a Tanzanian land grabbing scheme that would have displaced over 160,000 refugee farmers. I mean, he was 10 years ago stealing land from Africans, and now he's trying to steal land from Iowans. He hasn't gotten anywhere on his own merit. He gets there by hustling and taking from others, whether it's their land or their labor.
And without concern for the health and well-being of others. That's the other part of it. There's lots of ways, as I mentioned, that you can get rich quick. I mean, the system really is set up to allow for it. I mean, they uplift and promote capitalism. They take extreme risk and do everything possible to make these ventures successful. In the meantime, they do everything they can to tamp down people that are trying to help one another and trying to work on behalf of health and well-being of other individuals, like Food and Water Watch and Emma Schmidt, as an example. So Rastetter, I mean, he's way ahead of the game before he gets rolling on this. Now, this is somebody that you're well familiar with, Jess Mazur, an Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, said the Summit project's likely use of eminent domain to force the sale of pipeline easements is similar to Rastetter's alleged land grab in Africa that you were talking about, Emma. He's taking land to enhance his own personal wealth. But Jack Friedman, former CEO of Innovative Ag Services in Monticello. Gee, let me think here for a second. Jack Friedman, former CEO of Innovative Ag Services in Monticello. What's his opinion of Rastetter going to be, do you think, Emma? He sees Rastetter as kind and thoughtful. He's really a visionary, said Friedman, who plans to invest in the pipeline. Yeah, there you go. He's a visionary, all right. A hell of a vision. And I've got a vision from down in Mississippi that we're going to take a look at here very shortly, Emma, because it's one of the most graphic illustrations of the problem with carbon capture pipelines. But there's a lot more to that article. I encourage everybody to go take a look at that and kind of read between the lines, kind of think about who's making the comments and kind of analyze it in the way that Em and I are. Let me take a look at this next article here now. This is kind of your world, Emma. That's the Des Moines Register's profile and courage today for Bruce Rastetter. And this is what Food and Water Watch says from their website. A public hearing on the use of eminent domain for carbon pipelines draws widespread opposition. On Tuesday, legislators, landowners, advocates, and experts from the mounting anti-pipeline movement staged a public hearing on the use of eminent domain for the controversial carbon pipelines proposed for Iowa. More than 150 people attended the hearing in person. Folks, I got to tell you something. A hearing at the state capitol, try to organize one. Try to get 150 people to show up. That's an impressive rollout.
It was actually, according to multiple people, the largest showing that has happened at the Capitol since the pandemic began. So
nice.
That really highlights how many people are upset over this.
Good on you. With more than 90 additional viewers online, including impacted landowners, county supervisors, state senators, and representatives and activists representing bipartisan opposition. Citing widespread opposition from all corners of the state, speakers urged rapid legislative action to ban the use of eminent domain takings for the carbon pipeline projects as the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline moves into Iowa Utilities Board permitting. The threat of private land takings only increases. Recent news revealed that Summit Climate Carbon Solutions has less than 2% of their proposed route secured via voluntary easements. That was an eye-opener to me, Emma. I mean, 2% of their proposed route was secured via voluntary easements. So nobody wants that on their land, basically. 98% of people are not on board where that pipeline is going in, wanting to go in.
Exactly. I think there are still a lot of hard feelings left over after the Dakota Access Pipeline came through and, ripped our state across. I mean, you can still see the scar in the land from satellite photos today of where that pipeline came through. And Summit is using a lot of the same partners as Dakota Access did in this project. And so we don't expect anything different. We can anticipate that our land will be destroyed. The yields will be lowered. And at the same time, this is much more dangerous than your typical oil pipeline, right? I mean, carbon is an odorless, colorless gas. If there's a rupture, it can spread up to 4.5 miles. 4.5 miles. And that's just the lethal danger zone of death, right? Like 4.5 miles that away, you could die from this without smelling it, without seeing it, without having any sort of idea that this is happening to you. So it's just incredibly dangerous, incredibly foolhardy, and all of this risk is being burdened by Iowans. And for what? right? What are we getting out of this? Absolutely nothing.
Well, and I can think of a couple of scenarios. We'll talk about this, I think, here coming up shortly, but two scenarios where you should be very concerned about carbon capture pipelines. The first one would be if you're at risk for a derecho. You know what, folks? Everybody in this state was hit by a derecho twice in the last year. They're going to happen. They're going to continue to happen. A derecho can cause the land to collapse because of wind and destruction and that type of thing, and cause pipeline rupture. The other thing of it is this state is not only crisscrossed by pipelines underground waiting to leak poison in your neighborhood near your home. I mean, if you reside here, you're in direct proximity to a poison pipeline of some type. But rail lines, if you live anywhere near a rail line, a derailment can cause a pipeline rupture. And so those are two very obvious and immediate threats to everyone that's within proximity to one of these damn carbon capture pipelines. And unlike some other pipelines, maybe, if it ruptures, if this poison gas, lethal, very lethal gas is released near you, you won't know it. You might not know it until the hereafter. And we're going to talk about that coming up as well. Let me see if I can get this to come back up on screen here, because I wanted to continue with the article. So that is the 2% figure that we talked about. The event came on the heels of the House's passage of House File 2565 with amendments from Representative Kaufman, a Republican from Cedar, to establish a 12-month moratorium on eminent domain takings for the dangerous carbon pipeline projects. Legislators, landowners, advocates, and experts are calling for additional amendments to make the ban on eminent domain takings permanent. Food and Water Watch senior Iowa organizer Emma Schmidt, our guest today, said, let's get Emma's quote up here. Quote, carbon capture is a costly, false solution to our climate crisis, and the pipelines that support it spell danger for our communities. Until our legislature removes the legal ability for corporations to capture private land for dangerous carbon pipeline projects, Iowans will continue to live under the threat of eminent domain takings for these unwanted projects. Governor Reynolds and legislative leadership must commit to passing legislation this session that permanently removes the threat of eminent domain takings for carbon pipelines. With less than a month remaining in session, it's time to put this issue to bed. Okay, when I read that, Emma, my thinking is a lot of that deals with this eminent domain issue. That's real. It's valid. It's legit. Those people should not have, corporate pirates come in and just take their land. I mean, what the hell's the use of owning and paying taxes on land if you can't control who takes it from you? I mean, I understand that. But in your mind, how much of this issue is over the environmental impact? How much of it is, the environmental and health, I guess, would be the way to look at this. And how much of it is strictly eminent domain? People that maybe don't believe that it's a threat to their health and well-being, but they just want to keep their land to themselves. What's the split on that? Or is there one?
I would say that eminent domain has really been the key aspect of this fight that has united different people. I mean, because we're working with folks that don't necessarily believe in climate change, right? And so eminent domain has allowed different groups from Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians to kind of see eye to eye on an issue. While at the same time, we do have varying opinions on the other impacts of these pipelines, from the impact on climate change to the health concerns. To, I would say, another one of the top issues is the public money that's going to be spent on these. Because we're talking billions of dollars that have already been invested in carbon capture projects, billions of dollars that have shown us one thing, and that's that carbon capture and storage does not work. So once again, we are continuing to invest billions into projects that show no significant impact on our climate or for anyone besides the people that are getting the government subsidies out of it. In fact, a lot of times we see that these carbon capture projects have released more greenhouse gases than they've managed to store. So it's, like you said, it's a boondoggle. And I think that's another one of the kind of the issues that is able to unite people from various backgrounds. The environmental impacts, of course, people care about their land, they care about their yields, but they don't necessarily see eye to eye on climate all the time. So even though we're able to message around that, eminent domain is definitely the top messaging point that I think anybody can get behind. Following that, we see issues with the safety that is being, putting almost all Iowans at risk, and then the public money.
Gosh, great to have Emma back on the podcast, especially with your stocking cap there, Ben Folds. People look at that. What's a Ben Folds? Well, it's a great musician, folks. I'm a fan of Big Head Todd and the Monsters. I'm a huge fan, and I tell people that, and they're like, "What the hell's a Big Head Todd and the Monster?" Well, folks, it's a band. Let me bring this up on screen now and see if I can get this maybe the last slide to come up here so that we can talk about kind of the future of this. Now, this surprised me also. A 1-year delay on CO2 pipelines might sound like a good idea on the surface. Well, I thought it did. But HF 2565 looks more like a political game to protect politicians during an election year, said Julie Dunn of Eldora and member of the Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. Lawmakers need to get serious about this. They need to stand up for farmers and against this destruction of our land for private gain. We don't need a bait and switch. We need actual leadership from our legislators and more than just lip service to our agricultural tradition. Okay, so I highlighted this, and I mean, I get what Julie Dunn is talking about there. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Dune or Dunn. But anyway, yeah. This is not to be lost. You're starting to hear this a lot when it comes to big ag. And they want to talk about the history of farming. They want to talk about the tradition. They want to talk about farming as I knew it as a kid, Emma. And that's not what we're talking about here. These carbon capture pipelines and the ethanol plants and half of the corn being used for ethanol and all that type of thing. That's not farming at all. It really is industry. And we got to start to make a clear distinction on that.
Oh, yeah, there's no denying that our system of agriculture has changed in the past 30, 40, 50 years, and looks very different than what it did when I was really a true leader in agricultural production.
Yeah, for food and what we used to do. But anybody that wants to attack us as an example because we're opposed to this type of thing and say that we're opposed to the tradition of agriculture, that's just not fair. That's not right. It's just whether or not we're going to use it to kill ourselves, and that's kind of what's happening here. And I wanted to bring this up because this is Emma's world, folks. This is some of the photos from the Iowa State House. I wanted to bring this up. Some nice signs there. No carbon pipeline. You can see I don't think that's, they call that the rotunda, but I don't know if that's what that is. Just going through here. I always like to show the signs, Emma. And you've spent a lot of time making signs. I've made some myself also. A lot of work goes into these things. I always want people to show the signs. When I go out remote with Podcast by George, I'll stop people sometimes and just to get a video or a shot of their signs because they're handmade. Usually they take a lot of work. These people don't have any money. Now, if you want to go out on, you want to protest on behalf of Summit as an example, you might have a really nice sign, but here's a nice sign that these folks are holding up. Here's a nice one. Summit Carbon Band-Aid Corporation misleads for greed. Do the math, do the science, put it in writing. I mean, that's great. And the gal holding that up looks like she's from my generation. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, we've been holding signs up and walking and trying to get the world changed since she was a teenager, probably. And then here's some just photos from the site. Now, obviously, this isn't anything recent because there's no snow in the background, but Food and Water Action, fight like you live here. That's a great saying. You'll see that on Emma's emails. Now, this is up in Butler County. It's up there in Allison. Parkersburg is in Butler County, up in the northwest part of the state. I think it's north of Waterloo, maybe a little bit north and west of Waterloo. So looks like they've got a fairly good organization up there, Emma.
Over 100 people turned out just to take a picture. I mean, that's what they were there for, is to get that picture. Thanks to a really powerful landowner, Kim Junker, and her family that have been organizing in the area and making sure that people are aware of what's happening.
They take that photo with a drone or with a crane, or how'd they get up in the air like that?
A drone, I believe.
Oh, okay, great. All right, good. Well, now, as promised, I want to get to this because you talk about the future. This is the future. This thing hasn't been approved. It's not going through yet. So, a couple of things before I forget. I wanted to ask you about this for sure, Emma. The pipeline routes. When you and I last spoke, there was a possibility that maybe 2 or 3 of these things were going to get through. At least they'd been, approved for consideration or whatever. Might have been as many as 4 or 5 of these pipeline routes. What are the routes? I mean, how many of these are we talking about? Is it all Summit right now, or is there a possibility for more of these things?
So right now we know that Summit has their pipeline that crosses throughout Iowa. Navigator has Navigator is a Texas-based company. They also have a pipeline that kind of crosses diagonally through Iowa. They are taking the carbon to be sequestered in or potentially used for enhanced oil recovery or coal bed methane in Illinois, whereas Summit is heading up to North Dakota. And then there's also an Archer Daniels Midland and Wolf Carbon Solutions project. Wolf Carbon is based out of Canada. They are taking carbon that will be led to Illinois. And then there is at least one more project that hasn't been announced yet, but is getting there, that we'll hear about very soon. And there are definitely rumors of at least 1 or 2 more on top of that at this point. And a lot of this is just coming from the fact that the government has invested so much into the subsidies. In fact, the bipartisan infrastructure bill has $2.1 billion just in loan guarantees for these carbon pipelines. So right now, I mean, they're getting in while the getting's hot, right?
Yeah, and how do you beat that? I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier. I mean, they're getting this money in the form of grants and loans and subsidies and underwriting. I mean, why not do it? Why not take a risk? Why not take a chance? Why not go ahead and get these things on the drawing boards? And every one of these that reaches that stage is a greater likelihood that it's going to succeed. And although the majority of Iowans, as example, are opposed to it, as Emma points out, we're all paying for it, folks. That's where that money is coming from. You're funding something that the vast majority of Iowans are opposed to. And when we go through this, I know I've got friends, Emma, and you do too. You're just a worrywart. You're just a tree hugger. I mean, you're just worried about something that's never going to happen. Oh, really? Okay, look at this. This is from the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. Pipeline ruptures in Yazoo County. Dozens rushed to the hospital. Now, this was a while ago, but this is what this thing looks like. And I think this white stuff was put on the ground maybe to, I don't know if it's lime or
what carbon does when it ruptures from a pipeline. It basically forms dry ice.
Oh, okay. Pearl, Mississippi, Dateline. Residents forced to evacuate following a 24-inch pipe rupture in Yazoo County will soon return to their homes with an escort. Environmental specialists will conduct air quality tests to ensure no gas is lingering in low-lying areas. The pipe contained carbon dioxide, CO2, and hydrogen sulfide, H25. Now, I wanted to ask you about that, Emma, because my understanding is that hydrogen sulfide, these pipelines that we're talking about in Iowa, I thought that wasn't necessarily required, which leaves the gas odorless. I mean, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you don't know it's ruptured or leaking or going to incapacitate you until it hits you. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. The hydrogen sulfide is essentially what saved these people. And that's not going to happen in Iowa. They're not adding hydrogen sulfide. So
why? Probably because it costs something. That would be, it cuts down on the profitability, or maybe I would like to know why they're not doing that. Why that's not part of the plan.
It could be. It could also be just because they're claiming that capturing it from ethanol plants is very pure. It's basically pure carbon, much cleaner than when you capture it from like a power plant or whatnot. And so that could also be a reasoning.
Well, that's great. Let's get to the next sentence here. Residents in the area complained of green gas and a noxious odor. See that hydrogen sulfide? That's that smell of rotten eggs, folks. So they knew that something was wrong. The pipeline belongs to Danbury Enterprises. Through an initial investigation, the rupture could be a result of recent weather events. Now, this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. It appears the ground caved into a ravine, damaging the 24-inch pipe. And that can become because of flooding. It can be because of extreme hard rainfall and a derecho or a thunderstorm as an example, anything that would cause the ground to soften or give way or wash away is a potential cause of this. And these people, I mean, they were taken to the hospital, folks. I mean, there were people that were made deathly ill by this thing. And that's the potential, that's the possibility of what can happen here in Iowa if this is approved, Emma.
Exactly. One thing I'll add to that too is the process of sequestering the carbon, no matter what it's utilized for after. Also looks a lot like fracking in that it enhances the chance for earthquakes. You don't really think of the Midwest as an earthquake zone, but it very well could become one. And that too could lead to pipeline ruptures. One of the really scary things is that we know from Summit, at least, that their shutoff valves are anywhere from 7 to 20 miles apart. So you're talking about 20 miles of gas being able to leak out and spread throughout a community.
Yeah. And that's key because, and there's some math involved in that. I saw it. The valves are 7 miles apart, but the leak that is about half that. What was that math on that? I can't remember, but you can see where you can be affected in a 4 mile radius, but the shutoff valve is 7 miles away or something like that. So it leaves everybody at risk in the margins, I guess would be the way to look at it. I have to look that up, but it was not good.
No, and on top of that too, we just know that Iowa doesn't have an emergency management crew in any county that's capable of dealing with a mass gassing, especially because carbon displaces oxygen. You need oxygen to make a motor run. So you're not going to get an ambulance coming to rescue you. You're not going to be able to drive out of it. You are stuck, essentially.
Yeah, and again, it all goes back to it's an incredible risk that you don't want to have to face, and it isn't necessary. And you can line up these scientists from here to hereafter that'll tell you that it won't work. It's not only a huge waste of money that benefits a few, but again, it takes our eye off the ball when it comes to finding a real solution to what ails us in the way of energy and green energy and moving ahead with wind and solar. And it isn't that we can't, I think of this all the time, Emma, that we can't solve this. I mean, look at what we can do when we want to win a world war, as an example. They came up with that damn atom bomb, and that was something that nobody had ever envisioned or thought of or whatever in just a matter of a very few years. I mean, they created this thing that I still look at it and go, what the hell is that? Why did we ever do that? And just looking at what results from it, maybe we shouldn't have done it. But of course, that science also is involved with nuclear energy. The COVID vaccines. I mean, as soon as Trump wanted one, it looks like we were able to rush those through and get those created. Those didn't exist. I mean, we can do that very quickly when we have a president that wants to get it done. Let's get something done on this other than this crazy, not Walter Mitty kind of a project, these carbon capture pipelines, and get this thing solved and figured out. Let's not go into buggy whip manufacturing or talk to the Asbestos Manufacturing Association president when we want to get something done. Emma, I really enjoy having you on the podcast by George LiveLine. If nothing else, just to say thanks for what you and yours are doing. Anything in closing here that I haven't brought up or talked about that you want to mention before we sign off for this LiveLine?
I'm sure I could go on for days more about all this, but we definitely hit the highlights.
Well, and again, I want to click and put these up on screen here. This is Emma's articles. You can read them on foodandwaterwatch.org. That's the place that you want to go. Here's the Chiron running with the Facebook page where you can follow those folks. Let's say you're a Twitter head. Let's say you like the 280 character sissy slap fight that takes place on Twitter every day. That's what I tell people. My God, I can't believe what people say on the Twitter. Wow, there you go to Twitter at Emma FWW and follow her on there. And I'm going to put this up here also. Please like and follow Podcast by George on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and you'll be able to see, not me. I mean, that's not what it's all about, folks. It's seeing folks like Emma that are, talking the talk, but most importantly, walking the walk and trying to save us all. Emma Schmidt with Food and Water Watch. Emma, thanks again for coming on this podcast by George LiveLine.
Always. Thank you.
And folks, if you like Podcast by George, I'll leave you with this. Not only that Facebook address that I put on there, but YouTube. Please, even if you subscribe or follow and like us on Facebook, go to YouTube and subscribe there. Ring that notification bell. Leave us a comment because, I'm trying to, push back against the algorithm, which obviously is not going to be friendly to somebody that has our position on issues. Podcast by George, that is. Subscribe to us on Facebook and then go to or YouTube, and then go to podcastbygeorge.com. That's our home. All the platforms are there, from Stitcher to YouTube, Facebook, the iHeartRadio app, Prime Video, places like that. Just pick wherever you want to get Podcast by George, and you'll be notified of each upcoming episode. But that's going to do it for today. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast.